evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. A shooting at a Tennessee supermarket. One victim has been killed and a dozen others are injured. We bring you more from the local police chief. Horse operations in Del Rio, Texas are suspended following accusations that border agents were whipping migrants with their reins. A Border Patrol union official responds, and the White House denies reports they were planning to send illegal Haitian immigrants to Guantanamo. The New York Health Commissioner, who's been heavily involved in Andrew Cuomo's nursing home scandal, is stepping down. He says it's because the pandemic is almost over. The House is set to pass a new national abortion law that would allow abortions up until birth. Speaker Nancy Pelosi is challenged for supporting this bill while calling herself a Catholic. We hear Pelosi's response. The Wuhan lab planned to release genetically modified viruses into bat caves in 2018. Newly leaked papers show the lab's research team edited the viruses to make them more infectious to humans. A tragedy just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. A shooter opened fire inside a grocery store, injuring 12 people and killing one. The surviving victims are said to have sustained minor to severe injuries, and they have been taken to local hospitals. Officials believe the shooter used a gun to take his own life. The incident took place at the Kroger Collierville this afternoon. Police have evacuated all of the customers from the store. The local police chief, Dale Lane, said people were hiding in freezers and locked offices. Lane said they were doing what they were trained to do, which is run, hide, and fight. The Memphis Police Department helped secure the scene and the perimeter. And a federal arrest warrant is now issued for Brian Laundrie in connection with the death of Gabby Petito. The FBI now wants him for bank fraud. They say Laundrie used an unauthorized access device after Petito's death. That refers to a debit card and a personal ID number the man used. The FBI is still searching for the missing man. And New York State's top health official is resigning. Howard Zucker will step down as health commissioner after the governor finds someone to succeed him. Zucker is known for defending former Governor Andrew Cuomo's pandemic response policies.
In a letter to New York Governor Kathy Hochul Thursday, the state's health commissioner Howard Zucker announced that he is resigning. His letter reads, "There comes a time when the baton should be passed in this marathon journey that we call public service in New York State."
I agree with his decision. He has been a dedicated public servant for over 7.5 years. He worked hard through the pandemic, and I want to thank him for his service on behalf of the people of the state.
The governor told reporters that Zucker has agreed to stay on until she appoints someone else, and Zucker promises to help provide for a smooth transition.
He understands that in this time, I've wanted to take the first 45 days to assemble a new team going forward. That process is ongoing, and he understands and he respects that.
Zucker's letter doesn't say whether his resignation has anything to do with the new governor. It also doesn't mention former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Instead, it suggests that Zucker's resigning partly because he believes the pandemic is almost over. The letter reads, with almost 75% of the state's population age 18 and older fully vaccinated, we are at the point of trying to normalize living with this now seemingly endemic infectious disease. Cuomo appointed Zucker as health commissioner in 2015. Zucker has been heavily criticized for defending one of Cuomo's early pandemic policies in March 2020. The policy said that nursing homes couldn't refuse to admit patients solely because they had the CCP virus. In a report earlier this year, New York State's Attorney General Letitia James said the Cuomo administration may have underreported more than 50% of nursing home deaths related to the virus. James blamed both Cuomo and Zucker for the issue, an allegation they both have denied. In the resignation letter, Zucker again defended his department, saying the countless unfounded criticisms have been met by conscientiousness and competence, tenacity and audacity.
And the House overwhelmingly passed a bill today to provide $1 billion for Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. It's designed to intercept and destroy short-range rockets fired into Israel. The U.S. began financially supporting its development about a decade ago and has provided about $1.6 billion for its production and maintenance. And on Capitol Hill, lawmakers are preparing to pass a new national abortion law. This is in response to new restrictions on abortions in Texas. Today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi defended her support for the bill after an archbishop denounced it as child sacrifice. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more from Washington, D.C.
The House this week is voting on an abortion bill that will likely pass. And if it does pass both the House and the Senate and is signed into law by President Biden, it would allow for, on a national scale, abortions to happen even after fetal viability. Now, that's a term that refers to when a baby is considered alive or capable of living. While House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is drawing attention to this bill and ramping up support for it, she's being challenged by an archbishop from her own district who's calling this a shameful act, saying that this bill is deceptively named as women's health protection. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone called the bill child sacrifice because it would allow for abortion even at the latest stages of pregnancy, while eliminating state and local laws that have abortion restrictions. Pressed on her views on abortion as a self-proclaimed Catholic, here's Pelosi's response.
Yeah, I'm Catholic. I come from a pro-life family, not active in that regard. The Archbishop of the city of that area of San Francisco, and I have a disagreement about who should decide this.
She and other supporters claim it's their duty to restore access to abortions and undo obstacles. Even laws that require parental notification and consent for abortions are deemed as obstructions in this new national abortion bill.
What the Democrats are bringing before us, it's really a radical bill. It goes beyond Roe v. Wade.
This view is echoed by some moderate lawmakers. Republican Senator Susan Collins supports abortion rights, and she wants to join Democrats in strengthening Roe v. Wade. But she says this bill goes beyond that, saying it would, quote, severely weaken the conscious exemptions that are in the current law. Specifically, it would weaken the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a law that protects the ability to refuse performing an abortion if it conflicts with the person's religious beliefs. But Democrats are now saying this national abortion bill is necessary to combat the new Texas law.
If a woman has an abortion past the time where there is a detectable heartbeat, then a citizen would be able to sue the person that assisted, the person that performed the abortion on that woman. So you cannot sue the woman herself for having the abortion, but you can sue any person that was an accomplice.
This Texas law has really drawn strong rejection from Democrats, which is really the reason why they're planning to pass this abortion bill in the House this week, although it's unlikely to pass the Senate because they're lacking Republican votes needed. So simply it's political symbolism, a way for Democrats to show their stance on abortion. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And Roe versus Wade will be revisited in the Supreme Court this December. Mississippi is asking the court to overrule the landmark abortion ruling. And do you ever wonder how much class time students miss in quarantine? Well, they can miss up to 2 weeks, even if they're asymptomatic. That's going by the CDC's policy. But Florida is taking a different approach. They're making quarantine optional for asymptomatic students. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that story.
Governor Ron DeSantis has built up a reputation for his novel approach to dealing with the pandemic. In his latest move, the governor's changed his policy for students exposed to COVID-19.
Quarantining healthy students is incredibly damaging for their educational advancement. It's also incredibly disruptive for families all throughout the state of Florida, but particularly here in Central Florida. And so we are going to be following a symptoms-based approach. If somebody is symptomatic, of course, they stay home. But if a parent has a healthy child, that child has a right to be in school.
He says the parents of asymptomatic students have the last word to send them off or keep them home. Before, everyone in close contact with a COVID-positive student would be sent home for a few days, but students who test positive for COVID must still quarantine. Florida's updated rule differs from CDC guidelines in a few ways. The federal agency exempts fully vaccinated students from quarantine if exposed to the CCP virus. But students who've passed on the vax are asked to quarantine for 14 days, whether they test positive or not. In a statement, the Alachua County Public Schools superintendent said the governor's new rule is likely to promote the spread of COVID-19 by preventing schools from implementing the common sense masking and quarantine policies recommended by the vast majority of healthcare professionals. But the governor says that in Florida,
most of the students who are ordered to go home and quarantine don't end up getting sick.
The state of Iowa has already adopted a similar rule to Florida's. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
$75,000. That's how much the average hospital bill is said to be for people who've contracted COVID-19. The nonprofit group Fair Health came up with the cost after looking at insurance claims. The group found that the average bill could even be as high as $300,000. That's if ventilators are needed or if the patient has to spend some time in the ICU. But people who don't need to go to the hospital could still end up spending hundreds of dollars. That money would go toward lab work, radiology, or procedures that monitor the heart. Those costs could reach up to $2,500. But according to Fair Health, insurance providers will pay about $1,000 of that if the provider is in network. And a federal agency is requiring businesses to let people use whatever bathroom aligns with their gender identity. These are official guidelines, but Texas is working to keep the administration's new guidance at bay, now filing a lawsuit. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that story.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is known for suing the Biden administration time and time again. Now Paxton's taken issue with guidelines laid out by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This federal agency, established by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, enforces federal laws against discrimination in the workplace. Now the EEOC has published guidance stating that businesses must allow workers to use whatever bathrooms, locker rooms, and showers align with their gender identity. Paxton has sued, calling the June 15th guidance illegal and claiming it puts many women and children at risk. He makes several other allegations, one of which accuses the agency of violating the First Amendment by unconstitutionally compelling and restraining speech. The Attorney General is referring to this. The guideline asks, could use of pronouns or names that are inconsistent with an individual's gender identity be considered harassment? To which the EEOC responds, yes, in certain circumstances. But they add that the misuse of pronouns has to be severe or pervasive to be considered harassment. The Department of Justice, which defends the Biden administration in court, hasn't told us how they'll respond to the lawsuit. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
The Biden administration is taking flack from both sides of the aisle over its handling of the border crisis, but for very different reasons. Democratic lawmakers are decrying the deportations, while the Texas governor is making a wall using hundreds of state vehicles to keep migrants out. NTD's Grace Coulter has that and more on the border.
The Biden administration is facing increasing pressure from both Republicans and Democrats for its decisions relating to immigration and border security. This comes after around 15,000 illegal immigrants amassed under a Del Rio bridge in Texas, most of them Haitian. The White House announced Thursday there will be no more Border Patrol horse operations in Del Rio, following an outcry from Democrats and civil rights groups.
I can also convey to you that the Secretary also conveyed to civil rights leaders earlier this morning that we would no longer be using horses in Del Rio. So that is something, a policy change that has been made in response.
Border Patrol agents were recently accused of whipping Haitian migrants with their reins after these images circulated online. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki claims the images show horrible and horrific treatment of illegal immigrants. However, Brendan Judd, a top Border Patrol union official, told the Epoch Times that the agents were not whipping the Haitians.
Agents have to keep the migrants away from the horses for their own protection, and so they will use the reins to twirl the reins so that they will stay away from the horses, but they do not use those reins to lash out, to try to strike people, nor did those agents. Those agents did not use those reins in any way, shape, or form to try to strike anybody.
Judd added that horses are used as a deterrent technique to prevent illegals from entering the country. Psaki also responded to reports that the administration searching for a contractor to run a detention facility for migrants at Guantanamo Bay. She says there's never been a plan to do that. A number of Democratic lawmakers have also decried the deportation efforts to clear the migrant camp in Del Rio. In addition, Daniel Foote, the U.S. Special Envoy for Haiti, resigned Thursday, saying he will not be associated with the United States' inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees. Psaki responded to the criticism, saying it's not deportation, since the immigrants didn't enter the U.S. legally. She refers to the flights taking the immigrants back to Haiti as repatriations. She said since Sunday, 1,400 Haitian nationals have been returned to Haiti. 3,200 Haitians have been moved from the Del Rio camp to Border Patrol custody or other border sectors. Psaki said fewer than 5,000 illegal immigrants remain in Del Rio. But these numbers fall far short of the 15,000 who had amassed in Del Rio Sunday. It's not known how many of the illegal immigrants have fled to Mexico or how many have been released into the U.S. Meanwhile, Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he's directing hundreds of Department of Public Safety vehicles to create a steel wall to prevent any more illegal immigrants from crossing into Del Rio. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
The New York Taxi Worker Alliance held a rally in New York City in support of taxi medallion debt forgiveness. Much of New York City's taxi driving business has been greatly affected by rideshare companies such as Uber and Lyft. NTD's Jason Perry attended the event.
Here is called a taxi medallion. It's like a permit that allows taxi drivers to drive around New York City. They used to sell for almost $1 million just a few years ago. But with Uber and Lyft driving around the city, these medallions have lost much of their value, leaving taxi drivers in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Taxi drivers gathered today in a rally in support of taxi medallion debt forgiveness.
Without buying the medallion, CD let the Uber and Lyft company took our fare, steal our fare. They sold us, the CD sold us, we lost the investment, we lost the retirement.
In 2009, Chow's brother, Kenny Chow, bought a taxi medallion for $700,000 before the value suddenly crashed.
My brother, Kenny Chow, he very, very frustrated, very upset, and very angry, and I can't tell you now.
His brother was one of 9 taxi drivers who committed suicide in 2018.
Even after the suicides and all the ruin, on the final days of this administration, instead of adopting a plan that will cost this city just a couple $1 million a year extra, which is a fraction of a $96 billion budget, they would rather sell lies than to fix this crisis.
Assemblyman Ron Kim says that New York City taxi drivers are not being treated fairly.
It was a system that socialized the risk for private banks, the big corporations, for the billionaires, but gave you nothing. They took your profits. You, every one of you here, create the wealth of the city, the social, cultural wealth of the city. You deserve everything, not the banks. Yes, that's right.
Assemblywoman Jessica Gonzalez Rojas saw a flyer from 2014 that advertised the taxi medallions.
Somebody shared with me this flyer. It said, "Do you want to own a piece of New York?" This flyer sold our taxi workers a dream. But what they instead did is sell them a nightmare.
We also spoke to some other taxi drivers whose lives have been affected. Sudeb Halber has been a taxi driver for 22 years.
Uber coming, Lyft coming, my business going down.
Balkar Singh has been a taxi driver for 30 years.
So bank make money anytime, but we cannot make money. It's very hard for us. So mayor should do something, He can do it. He have power, and Schumer with him, he can do it.
According to New York Daily News, New York City offered taxi medallion owners $20,000 to restructure their debt, but the taxi drivers here said that's only a small fraction of what they owe. New York City taxi drivers on average are $500,000 in debt. New York City taxi drivers are trying to make their voices heard, and they're calling on lawmakers to help them with taxi medallion debt forgiveness. Jason Perry, NTD News, New York.
New stories are emerging about New York City's infamous Rikers Island prison complex. Democrats and Republicans alike agree that the situation is out of control, but they have different solutions in mind. NTD's Arian Pazdar has more from the entrance to the island.
Just a few yards behind me lies Rikers Island, a prison overflown with inmates but understaffed. In 2019, the city voted to shut the prison down. This week, 4 House Democrats, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, wrote a letter to Governor Kathy Hochul and Mayor Bill de Blasio demanding that they shut the prison down. In their letter, they complain about alleged life-threatening conditions. They reported overflowing toilets and floors covered in dead cockroaches, feces and rotting food. At least 12 people have died at Rikers so far this year. The 4 House Democrats want the prison closed and the inmates released. The governor has agreed and ordered the release of over 200 inmates. Now, New York Republicans met at the entrance of the island, saying Democrats are jeopardizing public safety.
We are seeing unsafe streets that are less safe than they were 2 years ago. Why we would want to let people out of jail who rightfully a judge has decided should be here. These are people who have underlying crimes, who were released from jail based on a certain set of conditions and couldn't even meet those conditions.
Joseph Borelli is the minority whip in New York City Council. He says Rikers is obviously in a crisis, but according to him, it's the mayor's fault.
The mayor has failed in his plan to close Rikers and open up community jails. The situation inside is deteriorating, and he abandoned the last mayor's actual meat and potato program to renovate some of the facilities on the island.
He added that the city managed to hire 10,000 additional workers to clean up the city, but seems to fail when it comes to hiring more correctional officers. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Coming up, California's governor signs a $15 billion climate package, which includes over 20 bills. The package aims to build California's resiliency for the future. And California's eviction moratorium is ending on September 30th. In addition, starting November, landlords can sue tenants over unpaid rent debt. More in just a moment here on NTD News. California's governor signed a $15 billion climate package, the largest in state history. It's aimed at combating wildfires, supporting immediate drought action, and reaching its zero-emissions vehicle goals. NTD's David Lamb reports.
So with that, let's sign this $15 billion package into law.
Governor Gavin Newsom visited the KNP complex fire on Thursday at Sequoia National Park. He signed a climate-related package and over 20 bills. Most of the bills were authored by Democratic politicians, with one Republican. The package includes $1.5 billion towards combating wildfires, which burned over 2 million acres and thousands of structures in California this year.
Address the issues head on, more suppression, more wildfire prevention, more technology, more personnel, more support.
Nearly $4 billion goes into zero-emissions vehicles, including putting 1,000 zero-emissions trucks and school buses on the streets.
We have 34 manufacturing electric vehicle companies in California, 60 headquarter companies, 34 that are just doing manufacturing. It's the #1 export in the state of California. We want to dominate that future.
And over the next few years, $5.2 billion would go into water and drought resilience, $3.7 billion into climate resilience, and a portion for sustainable agriculture. Now, back in July, the governor signed a $100 billion California comeback plan, and he asked people to cut down water consumption by 15%. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
California will be ending its eviction moratorium at the end of the month. A lead attorney shares his thoughts on the state's present condition. Here's NTD's Eileen Eng with more.
Since March of last year, California's eviction moratorium has been extended several times. Tenants who were unable to pay rent between March 1st and August 30th of last year were able to submit a declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress form to avoid being evicted. But the moratorium is ending on September 30th. By the end of the month, tenants must pay at least 25% of the rent due for the month of September. Starting November 1st, landlords can take their tenants to court over unpaid rent debt, regardless of how much the tenant owes. Jonathan Madison, a lead attorney at the Madison firm, told California Insider he foresees a wave of evictions and a domino effect.
The problem that tenants are going to run into is that they're going to have a hard time applying and getting accepted into a lot of rental units. I think landlords, property owners, and rightfully so to some extent, are going to be very concerned with who they let into their property next.
He said landlords will be very selective checking on the tenant's financial and credit background. A big part of the governor's rent relief program was supposed to help property owners who weren't able to collect rent since last March, but Madison believes it hasn't been very successful.
The state legislature received $5.2 billion from the federal government, basically in the form of COVID rental relief assistance. And unfortunately, only $320 million has been distributed to property owners to date. Now that means less than 5% of the total number, the total budget that's supposed to be giving relief to property owners has actually entered the hands of property owners.
Madison said people often hear how tenants are hurting, but neglect the fact that landlords are suffering too, especially when they're small business owners.
Many of my clients are small mom and pop landlords, people who live off of the income from their tenants just to survive. Like retirement, they'll use a home, a second property that they're renting as just retirement funds.
He foresees a surge in the homeless population since there's also a housing shortage. In the meantime, a landlord can only evict a tenant if they provide a legally valid reason. If landlords try to evict a tenant by locking them out, removing their property, or shutting off utility services without going through court, they can be fined up to $2,500. Eileen Ang, NTD News, California.
We have more information about the military plane crash last Sunday. 2 people were injured and hospitalized. The crash site was in a residential neighborhood in Lake Worth, Texas, where several homes were damaged. According to Chief Ryan Arthur of the Lake Worth Fire Department, the 2 pilots were hospitalized after ejecting from the plane. Lake Worth is located in the Fort Worth metropolitan area in North Texas. Police said 1 pilot's parachute became entangled in power lines, and the fire chief said 3 homes were damaged, but no residents were injured. He added this incident could have been much worse, given that this plane went down in a residential area. And coming up, the Wuhan lab may have already been capable of creating bat coronaviruses in 2018. A newly leaked grant proposal shows they were planning to release genetically modified viruses into Chinese bat caves. And China's Evergrande debt crisis is already driving many people over the edge. Some investors and employees have even attempted suicide. Find out more here on NTD News.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here with a new message about your Medicare benefits. You may be entitled to transportation, meals, and expanded coverage for dental work that includes extractions, fillings, and dentures, all at no additional cost. Plus, depending on your zip code, you may be entitled to the Medicare benefit that adds money to your Social Security check every single month. Call and get everything you deserve. Call now. It's free.
I'm on a fixed income, so I called to get money added to my Social Security check. They helped me so much.
I called to save money on co-pays, get prescriptions, transportation, and my dental work covered. I couldn't believe I was spending money I don't have to spend.
Millions of people have trusted the Medicare Coverage Helpline, and you can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-764-1930. That's 1-800-764-1930 now.
Shall we begin?
People are starving, sir. They're unable to buy a simple loaf of bread. Can you make any exception to the mark 666?
None. If you don't get the mark, you don't eat. It's that simple. My goal has never changed. People will bow down to me or they will die.
Less than 2 years before the CCP virus pandemic sprawled across the globe, scientists from the Wuhan virus lab were planning to release some gene-edited viruses into bat caves. That's as part of their scientific research, which aimed to make the viruses more infectious to humans. And U.S.-based researchers were also involved.
Some scientists from the U.S. and China's Wuhan were planning to do some risky research before the pandemic. In 2018, they proposed a project to genetically alter SARS-related bat coronaviruses to make them more infectious to humans, as well as releasing engineered viruses into Chinese bat caves. U.S.-based nonprofit EcoHealth Alliance proposed the research to a U.S. military research agency. They asked for over $14 billion in funding. But the U.S. government rejected the idea, saying it could put locals in danger. The U.S. nonprofit is a longtime partner of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the lab at the center of pandemic controversy. Scientists from the Wuhan lab were listed as partners in this proposal. The plan was part of a document dump by a group of scientists and activists trying to determine the origin of the CCP virus. Chemical biology professor at Rikers University, Richard Ebright, tweeted out the findings and said the world should be furious at the news. While Alina Chan, a scientist who works at MIT and Harvard, said even though the proposal was rejected, there's a good chance some preliminary research work has already been done. A fact sheet from the U.S. State Department earlier this year reported that the Wuhan lab has been researching virus engineering, but noted that the facility hasn't been transparent or consistent about its record, particularly when it comes to studying viruses similar to the one that causes COVID-19.
Desperation over China's biggest real estate development company is soaring. Multiple investors and employees have even attempted suicide, as Evergrande's default risk keeps rising.
The investors of China's leading real estate company, Evergrande Group, are straining under the pressure. Such high pressure that some have even tried to take their own lives. Li Ling, a resident from Anhui province, invested her entire life savings and that of her parents in Evergrande Wealth Management, a subsidiary of Evergrande Group. She saw no hope of getting the money back and in desperation turned on the gas. Now she's in the hospital. She says many residents in her community had purchased their products because it was a better deal than the bank. We use pseudonyms to protect our interviewees' identities, to keep them and their families safe in China.
My parents are approaching 90. Their hard-earned money was all invested there. I didn't tell them about the issue. I carry it all by myself, so I couldn't eat or sleep. My husband doesn't know either. If he knew, he would have beaten me to death. I didn't want to live anymore, so I turned on the gas. I'm in the hospital now.
An Evergrande employee from Anhui province, Cheng Da, tells us for many years, employees got Evergrande Wealth products. The company leaders assigned what they called purchase tasks to their employees. If anyone failed to buy, the money would be deducted automatically from their wages. Chen says some employees had purchased company stocks for their relatives and friends too. And adding to the pressure, this month, the company stopped paying its employees. Chen says these factors combined to drive a number of employees to attempt suicide.
Evergrande forced us to buy its products. That was illegal and fraudulent. We have reported it to the police, but no one has dealt with it yet. Now employees cannot receive wages. Our relatives and friends are hurt too. Some employees cannot bear it and don't want to live anymore. There are cases of employees jumping off high-rise buildings.
As part of its solution, on Saturday, Evergrande began repaying its wealth product investors with property, but most of the investors rejected it. In Anhui province, most of the properties are parking spaces, very few houses. Each parking space is valued at about $8,000, and investors note that price had more than doubled.
No one can accept that proposal. It's definitely unreasonable. If we don't have a house, why do we need a parking space there?
I can't accept the 3 proposals. The first, 10%, is too little. Besides, we don't trust him. All the money is with them. Now they want to trade in property, but I have to pay. I don't have money to pay.
An online screenshot shows that a financial advisor of Evergrande, Mr. Wong, posted in his WeChat group alleging, "I had a client who heard the news and died from a heart attack. Police intercepted a protest of hundreds of investors in Wuhan and sent them away on a bus."
Australia broke its $40 billion submarine deal with France to pursue another contract with the U.S. instead. How will this impact France's relationship with the two countries? According to a former French general, France has only been a collateral victim of rising tensions between Australia and China. NTD correspondent David Vives has the story.
Tensions eased between the US and France after French President Emmanuel Macron called President Biden on Wednesday to talk about US nuclear submarine sales to Australia. Last week, Australia said it would give up a $40 billion defense contract with France and would opt for US submarines instead. Former French General Daniel Schiffer, who operated in the South China Sea, calls the Australian move dishonest. But he agrees this will help boost US-Australian relations at a critical time.
One of China's objectives was to weaken the US-Australia relationship. Australia is a pivotal point in Southeast Asia, and China wanted to defeat this alliance. Considering this, China has failed.
In an article released on Tuesday, Schiffer says France is a collateral victim of rising tensions between Australia and China. And breaking the deal with France won't bring a lot of future consequences. He also says the current Australian government challenges China's influence more than the previous government, and that has escalated tensions recently. But what's important for China is to have free and undetected access to international waters in the Pacific Ocean for its submarines.
This is mainly about China not being able to deploy its subsurface ballistic nuclear submarines out of the South China Sea without being detected. They don't want the US, Japan, or Australia to be able to detect them when reaching international waters. That's why they are operating to control the South China Sea.
In a joint statement issued after Biden and Macron's phone call, the two leaders agreed to launch in-depth consultations to rebuild trust and to meet in Europe at the end of October. David Vives, NTD News.
Surging natural gas prices across Europe could hinder the economic recovery in Spain, where small businesses are crucial to local employment. They're also more exposed than elsewhere on the continent to steep rises in power bills. NTD's Faye Corder has the story.
Energy bills have more than doubled in European countries as gas prices rocket. It's due to low storage stocks and other factors. Analysts say the energy bill spike is hitting Spain particularly hard because many are on flexible rates, and small businesses are feeling the pain. Mayra Maldonado runs a dry cleaners in Madrid.
This has affected us a lot because our machines have to be working at all times. We can't depend on a timetable, and this affects us because our machines use up a lot of energy and we can't find another way to do things.
Small businesses account for over 61% of Spanish economic activity and about 72% of total employment. Spain's economy is coming back, but that recovery has been heavily dependent on spending by consumers, who are now facing 35% annual increases in their power bills. The Bank of Spain, in line with the European Central Bank, insists the rise is temporary and will not affect the economy. Last week, the government introduced an emergency package reducing taxes and putting a cap on gas prices. Italy and Greece face similar problems and are also eyeing measures. Faye Corder, NTD News.
The European Union will produce a so-called toolbox of measures that member states can take to tackle energy price spikes. The EU Energy Commissioner said on Wednesday countries can do that without breaching the Union's rules. This is as European consumers face a sharp rise in bills with winter approaching. The EU Energy Commissioner said the measures can be employed without breaching the bloc's rules. She said options include tweaking value-added tax and excise duties or using direct support to shield consumers from high costs. European power prices have rocketed this year, mainly fueled by the rising price of natural gas. Spain, Italy, Greece, and others are already planning national measures to respond to price spikes. And the European Union also plans to enforce one charging port for all mobile phones, tablets, and headphones. But Apple is pushing back against the proposal. NTD's Joanne Robson brings us this report.
The EU aims to have a common charging port for mobile phones, tablets, and headphones in a world first, with the move impacting Apple more than its rivals. Under the Commission's proposal, a USB-C connector will become the standard port. It will be on all smartphones, tablets, cameras, headphones, portable speakers, and handheld video game consoles. Chargers will also be sold separately from electronic devices.
We have here a USB-C port, but I have another mobile, my personal mobile. You will recognize the brand. I won't mention it. I have another port which is not compatible, so I always have two chargers with me when I go to abroad. It is an ordeal. I have to say things as they are. We are therefore trying to resolve this type of problem.
The Commission said it was not targeting Apple and only acted because companies were not able to agree a solution despite a decade of talks. Apple pushed back against the proposal. iPhone and Android users have long complained about having to use different chargers for their phones. Apple uses a Lightning cable, while Android devices charge using USB-C. The Belgian public were divided over the Commission's proposals.
Sometimes we work with friends, and one of them has a Samsung port, the other has an Apple one. Suddenly it's a little difficult to borrow chargers. If everyone has the same cable, it's easier. It's more reasonable. I think this is a good idea.
I think Apple has the right to have its own cables. I fully agree with them. I think there's no point in changing.
The proposal needs the green light from EU member states and EU lawmakers. Then companies will have 2 years to adapt their devices. Joanne Robson, NTD News.
Coming up, one of the original copies of the U.S. Constitution is going up for auction. Made in 1787, only 11 copies survive. And a Japanese architect is unveiling the story behind the Aquatic Center for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Both he and his world-renowned architect father designed centers for the Tokyo Olympics decades apart. All that and more in just a moment on NTD News.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now. Retailers have canceled MyPillow, and to thank you for your support, I'm gonna pass the savings directly on to you. Go to MyPillow.com right now to get deep discounts on all MyPillow products. For example, you can get my premium MyPillows, regularly $69.98, now just $29.98, the lowest price ever.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
While many businesses are struggling, physical bookstores seem to be making a surprise comeback. NTD's Phil Zoe takes us to some famous bookstores in New York City to find out how they're doing.
Books, books, and more books. Physical book sales are up across the U.S., including manga, which are Japanese comics and graphic novels. Let's go check some out. First stop, Kinokuniya. It's a popular Japanese book chain that's been in the U.S. since the 1960s. Now it has 15 stores in the States. We visit its flagship store in New York. Manager Kotaro Takano says sales of Japanese comics have doubled since the pandemic.
Growing even better than before COVID, especially we are selling so many mangas, anime.
Besides literature, it also sells unique gifts, stationery, and toys. Takano is hopeful sales will keep growing, especially when anime conventions return.
Yeah, we are really glad people coming back to the store right now.
And it doesn't hurt that it's located across the street from the serene Bryant Park.
I'm not a huge fan of manga books, but my daughter was, so we would come here a lot.
Next stop, we head to one of New York's most famous bookstores, the legendary Strand. It's almost 100 years old. NTD News was invited to its rare book room, which is now closed to the public. It has antique and rare books dating back centuries. While U.S. book sales are up 12% nationwide, Strand bookstore owner Nancy Wyden says this doesn't apply to all bookstores.
We were hurt by and continue to be hurt by the lack of foot traffic. Still, a lot of New Yorkers have moved out of New York and have not come back, and the offices are not back, and the tourism's not here.
The Strand is still fighting to stay afloat, getting by on just 50% of sales compared to before the pandemic.
Right, we're still here, yes, and making me, want to continue for another 100 years. We'll just see what that looks like.
And she's staying positive for the future.
With any kind of change, there's a lot of good things. But I am looking forward to Christmas, so I always look forward to Christmas.
I couldn't resist, had to get a book myself. The Strand bookstore is planning to open its rare book room on its top floor, hopefully by this Christmas. Phil Zhou, NTD News, New York.
An extremely rare printed copy of the Constitution is going up for auction in November. Sotheby's estimates it's worth $15 to $20 million. Let's take a look.
This official first printing of the Constitution is thought to have been made on the evening of September 16, 1787, and it was only for the delegates to the Constitutional Convention to use. About 500 copies are believed to have originally come from this first printing, but only 11 survived. This is the only copy that isn't in a permanent institutional collection.
The others that survive are mostly in libraries or still in official government repositories. For instance, the Delaware Hall of Records has one. There are 2 copies at the Library of Congress. The American Philosophical Society has one.
The document going up for sale doesn't have any signatures, but it includes a list of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. It also has a letter of submission from George Washington to the Continental Congress.
Presumably, this belonged to one of the delegates to the Continental Convention or to a member of the Continental Congress. That's who this very small edition was printed for. It seems to never have left the Philadelphia area, and it was consigned to us in 1988.
Sotheby's estimates that this copy is worth $15 to $20 million, but they've sold items of that value before. For example, they auctioned the first book printed in British North America, the Bay Psalm book, for $14.3 million in 2013.
What we've used as our guide is the Declaration of Independence, the first printing of which I think is the only document that can be compared to this Constitution in terms of significance and influence. First printings of the Declaration of Independence are actually much more common than the Constitution. There are 28 known copies.
The bidding process will take place at a New York Evening sales event in November, but the date is yet to be announced. This will be the first time a manuscript or historical document will be presented for auction along with major pieces of fine art.
Like father, like son. The Japanese architect who designed the Aquatic Center for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics reveals his inspiration. Decades earlier, his father designed a landmark arena for the country's 1964 Olympics. Here's more.
The construction of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics Aquatic Center was a dream come true for its architect, Paul Noritaka Tange. Even after the event, it still lives on as a legacy for both residents and those visiting in the city.
That is very important. I mean, because Olympic is just a midpoint in the life of these buildings.
Paul is the son of Pritzker-winning architect Kenzo Tange, who designed the Yogi-Yogi National Gymnasium for the 1964 Olympic Games. With its traditional iconic roof, The arena stands as one of Tokyo's most recognizable architectural landmarks. While the pandemic barred spectators from the Olympic events there this year, Tange says he designed the Aquatic Center with audiences in mind. It was supposed to house 15,000 people.
We created the space where no columns can be seen from spectator's perspective, and you can see the spectator on one side to the other. So because the people get kind of energy, seeing other side, get other people getting excited.
The swimming pool has impressed athletes competing in the 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games too. And on top of that, embodies the notion of sustainability. With a lifting roof, it can host more seats for large events. But when moved down, it turns into a medium-sized venue for smaller scale events after the Olympics. Paul said he once visited his father's grave to seek his blessing after winning the commission for the Aquatic Center.
I report to him and say that we have done this. I don't know how you feel about it, but we are very proud. So please bless us to give us a good power to design the facility. So that was my sentimental journey.
His father died in 2005. His 1964 Olympics arena also inspired the architect for the new National Olympic Stadium, home of the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2020 Games.
People around the globe celebrated World Rhino Day yesterday. Yet in East Africa, the northern white rhino is on the verge of extinction, with only 2 females left on Earth. Conservationists are now racing against time to save the species.
These animals are named Naijin and Fatu, the last 2 northern white rhinos on the planet. Both female, yet neither was able to conceive after the last male died in 2018. Joined by conservationists around the world, staff at the Old Pejeta Conservancy in Kenya are battling to create a successful pregnancy using eggs harvested from Naijin and Fatu and sperm collected from males before their deaths.
The process is being perfected on zoo animals in Europe primarily, and once it has been perfected there, then we will attempt to replicate it here in surrogate females based on the Old Pejeta Conservancy.
So far, 12 embryos have been created. The plan is first to artificially fertilize these embryos and then implant them into a surrogate southern white rhino. Those involved in this work are keenly aware of a time crunch, especially after delays caused by the pandemic, because Naijin, now 32, is getting older, and her eggs may soon no longer be viable.
Having the last 2 northern white rhino is a clear symbol of what extinction means. And because these animals, they are not able to speak for themselves, we act as their voice. We speak on their behalf so that we can try to prevent extinction not to happen anymore.
Decades of poaching have taken a heavy toll on the rhino species. Their horns are used as carving material and are prized in traditional Chinese medicine for their supposed healing properties. As this year's World Rhino Day just passed, many are reflecting on the challenges that come with protecting the species.
Rhino horn is worth so much money, more than its value in gold or even platinum. And that means that there are people trying to kill rhinos every day, looking for ways to get access to that horn and send it to places like China. And as a result, the people who protect rhinos are themselves in danger, sometimes even in greater danger than the rhinos themselves.
Other species, like southern white rhinos and the black rhino, also fall prey to poachers. Both are endangered species on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List.
Next year is going to be about cool and refreshing colors, according to Sherwin-Williams. The paint manufacturer has chosen Evergreen Fog as its 2022 Color of the Year. Sherwin-Williams says the mix of gray and green color has a sophisticated, earthy feel that can be used both indoors and outdoors. The company has chosen a Color of the Year for the last 12 years. They start by looking at industry trends and emerging themes to create a color mix forecast. The 2022 forecast included 40 colors and 4 palettes. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Don't forget to catch all of our programs on TV. NTD Evening News is on every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Find your local NTD channel at ntd.com/TV.